the arguments that are being made for the U.S. to somehow stay in Afghanistan, maybe even ramp up for some of these hots, but at the very least, don't scale back the war more than it already is. Keep up the airstrikes, keep up the support for the Afghan military. I mean, you point out the U.S. is a half. The NATO pledged to give the NATO with U.S., so it's mostly the U.S. pledged to give them $4 billion a year for their military. That's not like humanitarian aid and that's just for the military. So this is crazy. But I think the main argument that I hear is the poor Afghan people are going to suffer so much for if the Taliban take over. And this is, I guess, from what I could tell, the Taliban seem like somewhat horrible people. But you have to put somewhat in there because of the context of the region, that the Afghan government are no angels themselves. And so, I mean, is it a humanitarian catastrophe waiting to happen if the Taliban take over? Will it be, not that I mean, there's already been reprisal killings. Recently, I think like the Afghan pilots are being targeted for assassinations. I mean, ISIS Khorasan factions in the country, they're not associated with the Taliban, but they ruthlessly kill people. So just by the context of Afghanistan, how horrible is the Taliban?
Well, they're a pretty horrible entity, and they have a bad track record. But the Taliban is like, it's not one thing. It's not really a monolith anymore to the extent that it ever was. It's a conglomeration of different groups and interests. Some people are there because they want money. Some people are there because they really believe all the Islamism and really want, like, an emirate basically in Afghanistan. A lot of them just hate either the Kabul government or the foreign occupiers, and they see themselves as the national resistance. So they're nationalists, just like Ho Chi Minh was as much or more of a nationalist as he was a communist. A lot of Taliban fighters and leaders are as much nationalists as they are Islamists. This has always been true. Taliban are not the only bad actors. Warlords like Dostum have, suffocated, raped, murdered, like, tons of prisoners and children. And one of the other arguments I always make to kind of deflate that whole idea that America is the only thing that's like keeping us from humanitarian catastrophe. That is basically four things I say to that. One, here's something that's uncomfortable. In like 2018 and 2019, the Afghan government that we put in place and American forces killed more civilians than the Taliban, in errant airstrikes and stuff. That's uncomfortable. That's awkward for that argument. The second one is, like, that's not why we went in there in the first place. Let's not rewrite history like they try to do on the pages of the Washington Post every day. Let's not rewrite history to say that America went to Afghanistan to help the Afghan people. America went to Afghanistan as what was seen as a political necessity to retaliate against the 9/11 attacks because bin Laden happened to be in Afghanistan. Because in 1998, 1999, and 2000, when the Taliban were like mass executing women in soccer stadiums, the United States didn't send an invasion force to go liberate the Afghan women. We always hear so much about women's rights, right? As if that's what brought us in. Man, we stood aside and we were like even secretly talking to the Taliban, Like, we were dealing with them in back channels. And we certainly weren't sending an invasion into that landlocked country over women's rights.
Right. And I think at the time, didn't they actually pressure the Taliban to cut down on the illegal heroin, which they were able to get the Taliban to do? Maybe they could cut down on the public execution of women instead of, being so concerned about the drug war. But it shows where U.S. priorities are, huh?
It sure does. And of course, the outcome has been that, like, the amount of like hectares of land that have been dedicated to growing poppy, like heroin, has increased by a factor of 32 since 2001. So much for the drug war. Turns out that the war on drugs is no more effective, in Kabul as it is in Kansas City. Okay, like it's an utter failure in both cases. Maybe we should just drop the whole idea. Maybe we should stop declaring war on things. It seems like every time we mess it up, right? But the other thing, look, this whole women's rights and human rights. Another anecdote that deflates it is this idea of buggery. Yes, child rape I'm talking about. I mean, the bocce-baz culture of raping prepubescent boys after you like get high on hash and dress them up as girls and put makeup on them and stuff and make them dance for you is a real subculture. I mean, it was before my eyes to a certain extent, right? Like not literally, but they talked about it. They invited me to these parties. The elders did. The official policy of the United States, essentially, or at least the de facto one, sort of unspoken but spoken, was leave it alone. Leave it alone, because we can't alienate these elders because we need them to be on our side. Otherwise, they'll join the Taliban, and we need them to like convince people in their tribes to like join the local police or to join the army. So much so that when an American Green Beret walked in on a child raping and punched out the elder doing it, probably out of instinct, right? Red-blooded American boy who joins the military tends to think poorly of child rapists. So he may
Right.
not have been able to control himself. He punches out. Who gets in trouble? Who got in trouble? The Afghan elder? No. The Green Beret had his career affected and was reprimanded. I tell that story, and it was news at the time briefly, because it deflates all this disingenuous crap about how this was ever about the Afghan people. That is a canard. That is something that was thrown in later as justification. It's like when we invaded Iraq. I mean, you remember 2002 and 3. They didn't say we have to save the Iraqi people. That wasn't much of the narrative. The narrative was WMDs and Al Qaeda collusion. Well, as soon as Al Qaeda collusion and WMDs was completely deflated and proven false, which was already false and people knew it, but after we didn't find any WMDs, that's when we started hearing about, well, no, it was still worth it because Saddam was bad. Well, we heard the same thing about the Taliban. We didn't go there to save the Afghan people. We use the Afghan people, like we use so many people overseas that we don't really care about, as a continuing justification for maintaining an occupation militarily. That's all they're for. These people who are writing these columns, whether it's Max Boot, on the whatever neoconish right, or any number of like the liberal hawks, these people who are writing about Afghan human rights, they never met an Afghan. If they did, it was on like a 2-day tour that was staged like a Potemkin village for them, on a trip. They don't know Afghans. They never slept in their village. They don't give a crap about the Afghan people. They use the Afghan people from their comfortable offices to make arguments in favor of interventionism on behalf of a corporate media that is in bed with and sometimes sharing funding with a war industry that also runs the Congress, which runs them. I mean, I hate to sound all that conspiratorial, but this is just documented stuff. So I just reject that whole idea that, we have to stay for humanitarian reasons. Hey, look, if nothing else, so what? We should stay and keep killing more civilians than the Taliban? How is that helping them? The reality is, as long as America is involved, we actually increase the recruiting for the Taliban. The best recruiting sergeant that the Taliban ever had was the Pentagon's occupation of their country.
Right. Well, I'm sure another part of all of it is just whenever you probably shift the time preference for people in the country. I mean, I'm sure the mental illness that you've inflicted, with especially the drone warfare on the children and stuff like that, the air war hovering up there all the time, that now, with all the instability in the country, it's, capital investment. I read a while ago that one of the reasons that when the U.S. like built all those, I think they gave solar pumps to a bunch of Afghan farmers in Helmand, expecting that they would start to grow trees and stuff like that. But fruit trees take like 5 to 10 years in, good cases to start to bear fruit. Where, the poppy, it's one growing season. It's ready to go after a year. So it seems like that has to be a major problem for the Afghan people going forward until the, U.S. war in that country really ends. You can't even start to move back to a normal society because you're going to have a ton of terrible things that have to happen between the end of the U.S. war and, just Afghanistan rebuilding itself and trying to get its, own house and people in order from, the trauma that's been inflicted on them. And again, that's not just a result of the Americans. It's not like the Soviets weren't there just before us and killed a hell of a lot more people than we probably did, but
Well, what you're mentioning though that's so interesting is that Joseph Heller would have had, the author of Catch-22 would have had a field day with this war. I don't think he'd know where to start with the absurdities of it. America was always barely treading water, throwing anything against the wall and seeing what would stick, just floundering, really flustered. I remember they were trying something similar in Kandahar. They had me. They wanted me to convince the local folks who've been basically growing either poppy or grapes, right, and then drying them out basically as raisins. They basically been growing those two main crops forever, like for the longest time. And they were like, no, no, convince them to grow saffron. We're going to create a new like saffron economy. And I was like, that seems like a bridge too far. It seems like a bridge too far for me, infidel white invader from 8,000 miles away, to come in and be like, hey, I know the Taliban is pressuring you to like provide the opium crop to them, and that you need that money in order to survive, and also that you don't know anything else, and that your irrigation system is basically unchanged since the 14th century. But I'm here now, and I'm smarter than you and better than you because I'm an American. So just like grow this saffron, the profit margin will be great. Yeah, all right. That's crazy talk. It was crazy talk all along, and we saw lots of this. I remember they sent me a guy from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They sent this poor guy down. This poor, and I was not to be trifled with at this point. I was a salty, unhappy, not give an F kind of captain. You know what I mean? My base is getting attacked every single day. My kids are dropping like flies. I got a guy getting wounded while he's in the porta potty because they're dropping mortars on us every day. Like, I've got big problems right in front of me fighting a war against an enemy that I can't beat. And I've got drones. I mean, the amount of power in my hands was obscene. It's gross. I'm not bragging about it. It's ridiculous. I mean, just dropping bombs and artillery daily. Daily. My lieutenants were. Like, and they sent me this USDA guy, and his plan, the poor guy, I don't even hate the guy for it. Like, he's doing his job. We're gonna build a model farm right outside your gate that's going to teach them to use like PVC piping rather than just the standard canals that get blocked and are problematic and prone to the weather, in order to do their irrigation. And we're going to like change this 14th century irrigation system to like this more modern system, and we're going to build a farm that shows them how to do it, and then we're going to tour all the elders through it, and it's going to be like an operational little farm, but it'll be like a small microcosm, and they'll all be able to learn from it. And I looked at the guy and I was like, okay, I mean, obviously the colonel sent you down here, so this is going to happen. Guy's got a big checkbook. And I don't know how I haven't written more about this. Like, maybe I just don't have the emotional energy. But, like, so I'm like, okay, dude. I was like, that's great. But let me tell you what's really going to happen. I'm going to say you got a couple problems. One is you can't step outside my gate without getting shot at. The other day on a patrol with my guys, I had to jump into a canal because we were under fire within 4 feet of the gate of my base. And they attack my towers every single day. So, like, when you say right outside the gate, please don't think that that's a safe haven. And B, I said, what's going to happen is they're going to rat F your model farm, and they're going to steal all the PVC pipe. I said, it'll probably last a week, and it's all going to get sold off for parts, and it's going to be like a barren wasteland that's a monument to our stupidity. And he was like, damn, you're salty. And I was like, damn, I'm right. And you can guess how it went. That's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And it's just a perfect example of the farce and the futility of American efforts to transform societies on the other end of the world, with the military as the primary tool. Because they sent me a U.S. Department of Agriculture guy, but he can only operate if my soldiers put themselves at risk, forming a cordon around him so that they can build this model farm. The whole thing was a joke. And it was a microcosm of a war that was a joke. And it's so frustrating to me that even though it's a funny story, it makes me want to like punch my hand through a wall. And that's 10 years ago. I mean, that's how I still feel. It's the absurdity of it.